All right, I want to take a quick peek at Athens right now. Those crowds are building outside the country's capital here. They're very, very concerned about a package they say is going to be more onerous than the one they overwhelmingly rejected just last week. But that is the package that we're told that the Greeks will offer and creditors will accept, and these guys are going to have to deal with that. The president has not involved himself in this too much outside to say he was hoping and is hoping the Europeans could settle this, that he feels for the Greek people. Among the Republican presidential candidates I've talked to over the last couple of weeks, to a man, in the case of Carly Fiorina, one woman, they have said that they would not be in any way looking to bail out Greece or to support what they call their profligate spending ways. So this is dividing along political lines. Who better to touch on this and the impact of this than Being Nixon author Evan Thomas? He's written on so much. One of the best historians I know. Evan, you're hearing this, watching this, seeing this drama play out. No surprise, Republican candidates are saying, no, we don't do anything for them. But there is the contagion fear, right?
Yeah, I mean, instinctively, I agree with the Republican candidates. We ought to cut them off. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think they're going to get bailed out.
They will.
I think my man Richard Nixon probably would bail them out, too, to tell you the truth. Nixon was a guy who talked tough, but when it came down to it, he could be expedient. And if he thought that it could buy him some votes, he'd probably say yes to a package.
Well, a prominent feature of your book is his reaching out to China, when even conservatives in his own party were aghast at the thought here. And, of course, he surprised people a lot on coming up with the EPA and trying to wage and price controls. It's very liberal stuff. But saying all of that, how would a Richard Nixon handle what's going on there right now?
Well, on the good side, he'd be in the game. He'd be informed. Nixon was an internationalist. You know, he was a Republican when the party was isolationist.
That's right.
Nixon was internationalist. He wanted to be involved and engaged. That's the good side. But Nixon could be expedient. This is a Republican president who put in wage and price controls.
Right.
In 1971. That's practically socialism. And it worked, it was great, felt good short term, worked great. But as Nixon himself said, the piper must be paid. In his memoirs, Nixon admitted that it was his biggest mistake. It was an expedient politician reaching for the short-term goodies and putting off the long-term hurt. Well, there was long-term hurt. So Nixon could be an expedient politician. He could.
When I read your book on Nixon and all that, I'm thinking of the newspaper you used to work for. You might still work for him. I don't even know. Washington Post. And they had it out for Richard Nixon, and he famously told David Frost, I gave him the sword, and so he did. But I'm wondering, when I watch the way the media today, I would include the Washington Post or the New York Times going after Marco Rubio, or really going through with a fine-tooth comb the financial records and amounts raised by Jeb Bush. Who is their hated guy right now, without taking political sides or media slap shots? I mean, is it Jeb Bush? Who?
Nobody hated like Richard Nixon. I mean, I was there. They really hated Nixon.
That really was an agenda, wasn't it?
And they got him. I mean, look, it was a war. It was a war. Nixon was trying to take away their TV licenses. Nixon wanted to bankrupt the Washington Post. They were at war. This was as close to physical war as you can get.
But do they get today? Do they get today to the Jeb Bushes and scrutinizing his financial transactions? And now, in the case of the New York Times, I think sometimes getting a little desperate, looking at Marco Rubio's driving record or what have you. Can they go too far?
Sure. I mean, I think now it's mostly just knee-jerk. There is a liberal press bias. I've said this a million times. I don't think this is news to anybody, particularly Fox News. But there is I don't think it's a huge liberal bias. I think, but it exists. I think they were, and there is the general journalistic desire to get the politicians. I mean,
what about Donald Trump? What do you make of Donald Trump and what a Richard Nixon would make of his populist success?
Nixon would be admiring it to some degree because Trump knows how to hit the populist buttons, and Nixon knew how to do that. I mean, Nixon sort of invented this in a way.
Yeah, you're right about that.
Nixon was great at stirring up fear. He was. But Nixon was crafty. Remember, Nixon was running to the left of George Wallace. And, Nixon found it convenient sometime to have somebody further to the right, more crazy, more kind of scary than him. That allowed Nixon look like the reasonable guy.
Evan, you might have a future at this, historical biography thing. Evan Thomas, Being Nixon is his latest. Just impeccable writer. It makes you think.
Thank you.
But that Nixon isn't so bad. More after this.